My name is Margaret Collins, and I'm 72. I know the smell of Lonely Monday in a big city and the sound a phone makes when no one is calling. I know how a coffee cup trembles in a window when you're bracing for news you don't want. But that morning, I learned something else. There are moments when even people who spend their lives deciding other people's fates forget how to breathe. I stepped into the courtroom at 9 sharp. The benches shone like old boots buffed for a parade. My son, Daniel, sat to the right, too straight for a man with a bad leg. Too quiet for someone who'd had nearly everything skimmed from his life. Across the aisle was his ex-wife, Alyssa, in a red dress that shouted louder than any opening statement. Her parent sat behind her, perfectly composed, wearing the look of people who believe the room belongs to them and the judge plays golf at their club. The judge lifted his eyes, saw me, and flinched. Barely, but I caught it. Not fear, memory. 20 years ago, I worked in these halls. Not from the bench, not even with a nameplate anyone would remember, but close enough to know the sense, the pauses, the small habits power teaches itself. I set my old leather folder on counsel table. It was scuffed smooth, like the palm of someone who's held a tool for a lifetime. Inside weren't memories. Inside were facts, dates, signatures, balances, the kind of crumbs time leaves behind when someone believes no one is sweeping. The clerk called the case. The air handler in the ceiling hummed the low, indifferent bass of bureaucracy, and that sound threaded through everything, our movements, our pauses, the lies we tell ourselves to make it to lunch. I didn't look at Alyssa. Stare long enough into the cold and you become it. Better to let your gaze rest on what's still warm, the back of my son's hand on his knee, the pencil in my purse with the last inch of eraser chewed off, the corner of a form bent where someone had filled it out in a hurry. At my age, small things speak louder than speeches. When the judge asked who I was, I said, the defendant's mother. Then I added, and a former attorney who left the work a long time ago, but not the responsibility. Those words dropped into the room like a stone into a pond. On the surface, quiet. Underneath, ripples. I wasn't interested in what anyone thought of me. I cared that my son could hear the only thing that mattered. I'm here. I'm not leaving. I can't promise a victory, but I won't allow the truth to be shrunk to paperwork. I opened the folder.
I didn't dislike Alyssa when she arrived in my son's life. I liked her decisiveness, her even voice. Women who can keep their tone steady often cut cleanly, it's true. But sometimes that's exactly what a neglected garden needs. Daniel came home after a failed knee surgery. Back then, we believed it would pass, that he'd go back to work, save for a better truck, climb out of this shallow ditch the way he had every other time. Alyssa said all the right things. She planned mornings, wrote lists, managed budgets. I was grateful right up until the lists began to be written with our ink. At first, it was small. A premium insurance policy we absolutely needed, sold by a family friend. Then a routine title update on our old house for tax efficiency. Documents signed in a notary office where the coffee was good enough to make you forget to read the tiny print. I did read it. Reading and understanding are not the same ocean. You can see the shore and still not own a boat. When Daniel fell in the kitchen and damaged a nerve, we were already paying for temporary rehab that never seemed to end. Alyssa started talking about family values, about consolidating resources. Beautiful phrases make handsome wrappers for simple acts, taking out a loan against what my late husband and I built for 3 decades. I stayed quiet longer than I should have, but people like me don't stay quiet forever. I started making notes, numbers, dates, signatures, the paths money took when it wasn't supposed to be traveling, and then I saw the most important pattern. Our checks landed in one account on Friday and were reimbursed to another on Monday. They loved Fridays. Fridays create the illusion of, we'll sort it out Monday, and by Monday, no one remembers Friday. When Alyssa filed for divorce, she didn't only file for divorce. She petitioned for temporary financial guardianship over Daniel, arguing he was not fully capable of making decisions. That wasn't just insulting, it was an attempt to cast control in bronze. I didn't call my old colleagues. I went to the county archive. In those dust-shy boxes, where the air smells like glue and patience, I found the first real thread. Alyssa's father's name appearing in a series of cases where facts shifted like furniture overnight, and property moved from one family to another through a charitable foundation that existed exactly as long as it needed to. I don't make big moves. I make small ones every day. Small steps add up to distance, the way drops add up to rain. And now, here we were. A gray Monday. A courtroom. A judge who looked away because he remembered my name, or maybe a case where we chose the right thing over the easy one.
I set down the first stack of paper. People like grand reveals. Courtrooms and movies thrive on them. Real truth doesn't arrive by bucket. It's carried in cups. I brought 3. Cup 1. Bank statements for 12 months. The money marched like a drumline with a holiday schedule. Out on Fridays, refunds on Mondays. Memorized routes. Memorized excuses. Cup 2. The insurance policy with the beneficiary changed by mistake. The signature slanted like a left-hander. My son is right-handed. Cup 3. A family agreement Alyssa had called purely procedural. Nestled 3 lines down was the word power of attorney. Quiet as a cat under a dresser until you shined a light. I shined. I didn't watch the judge. I watched the second hand on the clock over the door. Honest machines move at one honest speed. I prefer honest things. Beautiful things age poorly. Honest things survive. Alyssa's father exhaled when Cup 3 landed. People who pride themselves on perfection have a particular sigh they save for moments when the script goes off the rails. In that sound, you can measure how much is cold technique and how much is actual fear. I didn't ask for fireworks. I asked for time. Time to audit the transfers before anyone hands over anyone's life. Time to pause the guardianship while independent eyes, not mine, not theirs, look at the lines money drew when it thought no one was watching. At my age, you measure requests in years of experience. Where you're looking, who's near, how steady your hands are when everyone else is waving theirs. The judge listened. The clerk wrote. Alyssa twisted the ring on her finger, the nervous warmth of people who wrap their panic in shine. I knew there wouldn't be a ruling today. Something better was happening. Recognition. That we hadn't left this on the kitchen table, that we weren't trading peace for surrender. When the hearing ended, I rose slowly, as if I were 85 instead of 72. Not to appear strong, to appear steady. Strength flares and burns out. Steadiness warms for a long time. On my way to the door, a shadow slid beside mine, Alyssa's father. His steps were lighter than I'd imagined. He passed close enough for me to catch the scent of expensive aftershave. Sharp, metallic, a hint of something older, like the air in a room where a safe has just been opened. That smell told me more than his speeches ever would. My house sits at the edge of town, where the streetlights give up and the stars reclaim their sky. I like it there. Darkness leaves the heavens alone. It doesn't make them prettier, it makes them honest. That night, I spread everything on my kitchen table. Statements, photocopies, note cards. I stitched them together with twine and slid in paper tabs, the way I used to do for law students. When you're handling someone's dignity, precision is a form of respect. This respect isn't always shouting. Often, it's sloppiness. I wanted to write a letter. Not to the judge, not to Alyssa, to myself, 20 years younger. You did right to walk away, but you didn't forfeit your right to come back for a day when a period needs to be placed. At my age, we don't write letters for replies. We write them to avoid betraying ourselves. I put the kettle on. I always do, in important moments. The whistle is a ritual, permission to slow down. Simple things make you feel alive. Daniel called late. Exhaustion makes an honest sound over the line. We didn't talk about court. I told him what came next. He said, "Thank you." I said, "We're family." Not sentiment, logistics, like setting the kettle and letting it sing only when the water is truly ready. Near midnight, I pulled out one last page, an email referencing a family mutual aid foundation. I know the difference between charity and cover. The language was autopilot, cut and paste phrases, dates evenly spaced, the lazy music of someone who thinks repetition makes a lie sound like a rule. Language repeats itself. That's where lies get caught. I marked the page and slept, not drifted, slept, with the calm that comes when you accept that tomorrow you may have to speak louder than your preference, and that you have the documents to make the volume count.
The second hearing drew fewer eyes. Same room, same wood, different air. When a person brings paper instead of drama, air stops taking sides and becomes a tool. I laid out the map, slow as careful brickwork. Money flows, foundation ties, the impossibility of changing a beneficiary without capacity properly documented. I didn't attack characters, I attacked procedures. Tug procedures and whole systems wobble. The judge's grip on his pen told me more than his face. Firmer on the left, softer on the right. The body language of real attention. I asked to defer guardianship until the audit. Not victory, ground. A place to stand while the storm tires. Alyssa tried to drag us back into a talk show hour. Tears, stories polished for sympathy. But paper chills tears. They evaporate under the fluorescent lights of a ledger. The judge ordered the audit. I thanked the system, not the man. Machines, even rusty ones, work when the right oil hits the gears. In the hallway, Alyssa's father approached. His eyes stayed level, but his pupils had that tight spark of someone who rarely miscalculates and hates the rare exceptions. "You crossed a line," he said. "Lines exist for all of us," I answered. "For me, a line isn't where someone gets uncomfortable. It's where someone gets hurt." He gave a short nod. Not agreement, not threat. A notation. Account for this woman. Audits take time. 3 weeks in our case. You can grow seedlings in 3 weeks. Or doubts. I kept my rhythms. The garden, the Saturday market, a library book on Tuesdays, the neighbor who needed help with the ramp permit and Medicare forms. Respect comes easy when you do small things quietly.
At some point, people stop asking your age and start asking your advice. The auditors were punctual and unromantic. They made no promises, but their questions were clean, and clean questions always find something. I watched their tone change as they hit the foundation emails. If they could prove only half of what I suspected, we wouldn't be defending. We'd be negotiating how to repair what was broken. Daniel visited more. He learned slow steps, not just across the room, but in conversation. People who've spent years arguing they're okay don't stop overnight. But he paused more. I trained myself not to patch those pauses. Mothers love to fill silence. Sometimes the kindest thing is to stand guard while a grown child hears his own new voice. I didn't ask about Alyssa. I knew enough. Watching my son reclaim the kind of yes that means yes and the kind of no that ends a paragraph, that was the only news I needed. The report arrived on a Wednesday. Dry the way the truth should travel. Unexplained expenses, signatures that couldn't be authenticated, relationships that couldn't be called incidental with a straight face. No fireworks. Order. I closed the file and felt a little space open inside my chest. People my age don't celebrate loudly. We store a long exhale at the bottom of our lungs and let it out slow, like heat from a brick after sunset.
The last hearing was the quietest. Not the hush of fear or the hush of ceremony. The quiet of work being recognized. The auditor read. The judge looked the way a builder looks at a shelf he just hung, measuring whether it will hold what has to sit there. It would. The ruling was plain. Temporary guardianship denied, transfers placed under independent control, beneficiary change voided, the foundation forwarded to regulators. I didn't smile. I wanted a minute of air outside before anyone said congratulations. But I stayed until the clerk finished the very last point. Attention is a form of gratitude. Alyssa didn't cry. Her father didn't protest. They had the look of people who didn't lose a battle, but an argument. Those losses are quieter. They sometimes make people think. The judge met my eyes. There wasn't apology or sympathy there. There was respect, dry, honest, like a well-sorted archive. I gave a small nod. At our age, we learned to treasure gestures more than speeches. We stepped into the hall. Dust and coffee. I touched the cool rail. Metal tells the truth. This is solid. You're safe to lean. Life after decisions is simpler than anyone admits. It doesn't hand out prizes. It returns what you invest. The garden, a Saturday basket of peaches, a clean kitchen table, a favorite throw blanket, a window with light enough to read by. I wasn't hunting for transformation. I was rebuilding routine. Daniel's stride returned, and not only in his leg. He found the sentence that matters most. No, without a second clause. Not rudeness, foundation. We didn't stop being a family because someone made a bad choice. Mistakes are part of the inventory. What matters is record keeping. Write them down so they stop borrowing attention from better things. I didn't go back to practice. I didn't want money to be the reason I carried other people's burdens. But I started sitting with folks who collapse in front of forms. Medicare, taxes, permits, appeals. It doesn't take strength. It takes patience. Age gives you more of that if you let it. Sometimes I think about the judge and that half flinch when he saw me. Maybe he remembered a younger version of me. Sharper voice, brown hair. Maybe he remembered a case where we did the right thing and no one clapped. I don't need to know. I know this. Life returns us to old rooms now and then to let us play a new role. I set 2 place settings most nights, sometimes 3 when the neighbor boy stops in with a resume question. My house didn't get bigger. It just has more room for people who need quiet long enough to hear themselves. The kettle whistles when it's ready. It always has.
In those moments, I imagine even the courthouse vents breathing out steam in the middle of the night when a clerk files something that makes the world one notch straighter. I write one line in a small notebook before bed. Today, silence, earned. It's my favorite kind of verdict. A few weeks after the ruling, the papers on my desk stopped looking like weapons and started looking like history. I kept them stacked neatly in the corner, not because I needed them, but because I liked the way their weight had become harmless. The edge of a thing can be dulled by time or by truth. I prefer truth. Daniel came Fridays for dinner. The first time he walked in without his cane, I didn't say a word. Mothers know when silence is kinder than applause. He ate more than usual, 2 helpings of potatoes, 1 of pride, and when he stood to rinse his plate, he caught me watching. "Better?" I asked. "Different," he said, "and better is indifferent somewhere." We washed dishes without a plan. The past has plans. The present has soap and hot water. Before he left, he looked around the kitchen like a man walking through a familiar town after a flood. Same streets, same streetlights, but the air behaves. He hugged me, kissed my forehead, and the door closed softly, leaving the kind of quiet you can sleep inside. The black sedan arrived on a Tuesday. It waited at the curb long enough for me to wonder if it was lost. When I opened the door, Alyssa stood on the sidewalk with a paper bag hugged close like a contrite child. No red dress this time, gray coat, hair pinned back, the kind of neatness people wear when they're trying to keep from coming apart. I'm not here to start anything, just to return these. Inside the bag were albums, birthdays, warm water at the lake, a dog that lived 3 houses ago, faces the world hadn't dented yet. I turned a page and felt time move under my thumb. "I kept them," she said, "because I thought they'd remind me of who we were. They do. They also remind me of who I became. I'm sorry." I don't believe in speeches for strangers. I believe in sentences for people who used to be family. "Thank you," I said. She looked past me into the house, just a glance. Some people are always measuring room for regret, like they might need to sit down in it in case the weather changes. She didn't ask to come in. I didn't invite her. A boundary is sometimes just a doorframe doing its job. "I'm starting over," she said, almost apologizing to the wind. "It turns out there is a lot of over to start. You'll need small plates. Big ones make you think you owe yourself more than you can digest." That made her smile. Tired, clean. She nodded, returned to the sedan, and the taillights stitched themselves into the dusk. I carried the albums to the dining room table. A photograph slid loose. Daniel on a dock, knees bent, the dog mid-jump, water just about to become memory. I put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon, not to romanticize what we lost, to keep my eye honest about what we keep. The letter arrived 2 days later. Thick envelope. No return address. Inside, a sheet of paper with 3 lines. "Your presence in court reminded me why I chose this work. Justice may age, but it does not retire. J. Harper." No seal, no flourish. I folded it carefully, put it under the kettle like a coaster for truth, and poured myself tea. The whistle quieted as the cup filled, the way hard things quiet when you give them shape. People think a courtroom ruling ends a story. If they're lucky, it ends a fight. What it really does is hand you a broom. There's sweeping to do. Inside, outside, in your files, in your habits, in the corners of you that learn to live bent. I started where I always start, the kitchen table. I made a list. Cancel the extra insurance, transfer the beneficiary back with documented capacity, open a new account for medical receipts with 2 signatures, his and mine, call the county clinic about volunteer hours, buy better tea. I added a last line. Do not become a person whose only talent is fighting. Then I underlined it. Even justice can turn sour if it becomes your only salt.
At the county clinic, they gave me a thin desk by a window that faced a parking lot and a crabapple tree. My nameplate read, M. Collins, Form Support. People brought me boxes of paper the way flood victims bring buckets to someone with a mop. Medicare, Social Security appeals, rent assistance, overpayment letters that speak a dialect of English only machines fully understand. I translated machine into human. An older man named Wyatt sat across from me for 2 afternoons in a row, Vietnam veteran. Shoulders like hangers under a too thin jacket. His overpayment notice was wrong in 5 ways, all of them boring. Ma'am, he said, I don't know how to, I can fix a carburetor blindfolded, but this is a carburetor, I said. The government's just put it in a file cabinet. He laughed, and it had the sound of metal finally catching a thread. We fixed his overpayment, which is to say, we made the form say what the truth already knew. He left me a bag of pecans in a paper sack with his name written in pencil on the side. People who have known scarcity sign their generosity, not because they need credit, because they need it to land. I walked to my car with a lightness I hadn't felt since before the red dress. Work that mends more than what it touches. There were still embers in the ash. Alyssa's father called one afternoon from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because numbers and I have a history. Mrs. Collins, he said, his voice the kind rich men use when they're buying charity galas and selling apologies. I believe we could simplify everyone's life. Life isn't a spreadsheet. It doesn't simplify. A settlement for your son, he continued, ignoring my sentence the way trains ignore flowers. He read a number. It was large enough to intimidate, not large enough to insult me on the right axis. Have you heard of the phrase consideration? I asked. Legal term. Means you give something real to get something real. The real I want is accountability, the kind regulators can read. That's not necessary, he said, too quickly. The guilty always argue that not necessary is a synonym for not right. It is, until it isn't. And I don't care to gamble with the slot machine you built. Silence. The kind that has a watch in it. He cleared his throat. You're very good at this. You should have stayed in the law. I did, I said, and hung up. Some jobs don't need business cards. I wrote the conversation down and put it in a folder marked noise. It's good to label what doesn't deserve your attention. Filing is a moral practice when done correctly. One Sunday, I drove past the lake from the picture. Somebody had built new houses where the dock used to be. The water looked like a coin in a pocket, dull until the sky shook it. I parked anyway, walked to the public path, and stood where the dog would have jumped if time were charitable. I don't pray much. I talk to facts and let them take the stairs to God if they want. But I said a few words out loud, quiet enough that no one could mistake them for a request. More like a report. We did not become cruel. We did not let fear do the thinking. We did not confuse being right with being loud. A breeze carried something that smelled like last year's leaves and this year's rain. I went home with it on my sweater and felt richer. Daniel started laughing again. Not loud, deep. The kind of laugh a person's ribs remember. He bought a secondhand bike and tuned it so carefully you'd think he was negotiating a peace treaty with every bolt. The first time he rode it around the block, he came back with cheeks pink as a boy's. "I forgot this," he said, breath fogging in the cold. "I forgot the part of me that moves for pleasure instead of purpose." "That part survives," I said. "It waits in a drawer until you're done with whatever pain demanded." He leaned the bike against the porch and came inside for coffee. He drank it black. I took mine with cream. The house held both without choosing sides. I kept the judge's letter under the kettle until steam finally curled its corners. Then I framed it in a cheap frame from the hardware store and propped it on a shelf. Visitors thought it was a piece of art. Minimalist, spare. They'd ask what it meant. I'd say that someone at work had a good day. That's all I've ever expected of people with power, that they experience the occasional good day and don't pretend the bad ones are inevitable. On a Wednesday, the clinic overflowed. A storm had blown through overnight and power lines were down. People needed emergency vouchers. The copier hiccuped itself into a tantrum and 3 toddlers used my shoe as a drum. It would have been a simple mess if not for a woman in a blue coat shaking at the front door, like a wire in wind. She didn't want forms. She wanted a place to sit that wasn't a car. We found her a chair and a cup of water. The world often improves if you assume the first thing a person needs is not advice, but a surface. When she could speak, she said, "They told me to come here." She slid a letter across the desk. I read it and felt every year of my life pull in the same direction at once. The letter was from the same Family Mutual Aid Foundation. New name, same trick, different branch. They multiply like weeds when enforcement sleeps. I can't fix it today, but I can make the first call, and sometimes the first call is the one the others listen to. We blocked the withdrawal. We flagged the account. We wrote a complaint with words sharp enough to leave a paper cut in anyone who touched it. I gave her my clinic hours, and she gave me a nod that meant the floor had stopped moving. I went home that night and cried for the first time since the red dress. Not long, not loud, just enough to oil the hinges. The sedan never came back. Alyssa sent a short email 1 month later. I found a small apartment near a bus line. I'm working mornings at a bakery. Please tell Daniel I'm glad he is well. A. I did tell him. He nodded, neither forgiveness nor grudge in the gesture. Some letters are meant to be heard and then filed under weather. He brought me a loaf from the bakery a week later. It smelled like wheat and apology. We ate it with soup and butter and didn't say anything that would make it something it wasn't. Spring leaned into the yard and the crabapple tree at the clinic burned itself pink and white. Wyatt came in with a new hat and the same smile, brought by the thing that happens when a machine finally admits it was wrong. He left me another bag of pecans. I told him if he kept paying me in nuts, I'd start a store. He said, I'd shop it. A young neighbor asked if I could look at his resume. He wanted to sound important. I changed 3 verbs and deleted half the adjectives. Important is what you do on the second week, I told him. Honest is what gets you to the second week. He left, embarrassed and grateful, which is the correct way to leave advice you didn't want but needed. On the first truly warm day, Daniel and I sorted the garage. We found my late husband's toolbox, the red one with the dent in the lid where a washer fell from a shelf the year we couldn't afford a new refrigerator and learned we didn't need one. We oiled the hinges. We kept the dent. Dents are inventory. They're not shame. We also found a cardboard box of old court pads with my maiden name on the top sheet in blue ink, M. Rhodes. I held it like something that might fly away if I blinked. It didn't. It's funny how identity waits. It doesn't need constant feeding. It needs occasional acknowledgement. I tore off the top page, wrote, Form support, Tuesdays and Thursdays,
9-1, and pinned it to the clinic corkboard the next morning. People laughed. They thought it was quaint that I used paper. The copier chose that moment to cough up a perfect copy of my sign and jam its own tray. Machines love an audience. One evening, as the sun fell even with the kitchen window, the phone rang again. A different number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Habit answered. Mrs. Collins, this is Investigator Phelps from the State Charitable Oversight Division. I thought you might want to know we've opened a broader inquiry into the Foundation network. Your filings were useful. Useful, I said, rolling the word in my mouth like a coin. We don't often get submissions with this kind of documentation, he said. If more citizens did what you did, we'd have less to do, and then we might do it better. I laughed, quietly. Don't let that get back to your supervisor. It sounds like a budget cut. He chuckled. We'll be in touch if we need testimony. If we don't, please assume that's the best outcome. I thanked him and hung up. I stood at the sink, looking at the backyard where the light made dandelions look like stubborn stars. It's a good thing to send paper into the world and have someone call it useful. It means the world still has places where usefulness is the language of grace. I slept well that night, not because everything was fixed, because enough was. In the morning, I made coffee and, on impulse, pulled a blank sheet from the back of my old leather folder. I wrote, "Justice is not anger. Justice is the quiet breath you earn when you walked the long way and didn't cut across anyone's lawn." I set the paper in the fireplace and watched it turn to light without making a fuss. Then I opened the window and let the room breathe. When the kettle whistled, I lifted it off the flame and held it in the air a second longer than necessary. I imagined the courthouse across town exhaling through its vents at the exact same time, somewhere in a hallway where a janitor was buffing the floor and a clerk was stamping an envelope and a judge was thinking about good days. I like to think buildings remember us. I like to think the rooms we leave also leave something in us, an air, a shade, a discipline. If I learned anything from all of this, it's that you don't need to be young to be new. You need to be willing. I am willing. The albums live now on the lowest shelf in the living room, where hands can find them without ceremony. The framed letter sits above the kettle. Daniel's bike leans against the porch. The clinic sign stays taped to the corkboard, crooked, honest. The red toolbox shuts with a sound I'd recognize in a storm. Some nights, when the house is quiet and the fridge hums the old steady hymn of electricity, I write one line in my notebook. Today, silence. Earned. I close the book like a verdict, then I sleep as if I've been acquitted of something I never did but was accused of by fear, that I was finished. I am not finished. I simply serve differently now. And when the phone rings, or a knock comes at dusk, or a letter without a name finds my mailbox, I put the kettle on and make room at the table, because that's how justice stays limber, by practicing hospitality with a spine. If the world asks how we healed, I'll show them the broom, the files, the bike, the kettle, the toolbox, the albums. I'll say, we didn't heal by forgetting. We healed by organizing the memory until it could live with us without shouting. And I'll mean it.